introductions. I'm Jerry, and basically I'm a YouTuber, I'm a Twitcher. I do a lot of research involving the history of video games, and I basically do some historical references when I'm playing video games. And I've been doing this kind of research since the early 2000s, because that was about the time I was turning close to 18 and was kind of deciding what I wanted to do. And history and computer science were my two focuses in college. So I figured I'd combine the two and do research when it comes to games of all types, especially older PC games. And when I say PC in this case, I mean not just like, IBM PC, but all the way back to pre-IBM. Oh yeah, Commodore, Apple, Amstrad. And so that was what actually got me started. My grandfather.
That's a great story about how that got going.
Oh yeah, my grandfather had a Sears Telegames Telstar Pong system. Now my grandfather, when he bought it in the 70s, was already on up there in age. I mean, he was in his late 60s, but he was an electronics engineer in the Army Air Corps. And so he was an early adopter of anything tech. And so he bought a Pong unit. He enjoyed it, loved playing it every so often, and it still works. I have to clean the board off a little bit because the V-hold has just kind of gone wonky with it, but it still works otherwise. It makes the pings, the pongs, and still shows up on the TV. But I do a lot of research. I do social media and for several YouTubers, including Metal Jesus Rocks and Drunken Master Paul to help with that. And like I said, I have my own YouTube, Twitch channels where I talk about gaming history, show off some of the older gaming pieces I have, and hopefully I've got some stuff in the pipe. I may actually be working on a video game soon. Just stay tuned for an announcement on that because I'm kind of excited there.
I'm Doug Goodall. I've worked in the video game industry for about 20 years. I'm not currently working on anything there, but I do have a fair bit of experience in the industry, so I know how things are done, and I know a little bit about the early history of video games. And of course, I'm a fan of video games. I've played them since I was a kid. So.
What part of what was your specialist or whatever?
Oh, I'm usually a programmer or a writer, like a quest writer, and of course, like item descriptions and all that kind of stuff. But mainly I've done programming more than anything else.
So you said you've been working on games for a while. I know you said you're having current projects, but what did you enjoy most about working in the gaming industry?
I like the work itself. It's very creative. It's it's very challenging. It's a lot of different things to do. One reason I like working at little indie companies is because then I can be a programmer and a writer and maybe like do sound effects or something. I actually don't like working at a big company because it's like, I write Lewis scripts all day and that's all I ever do.
Yeah.
It's going to get dull. But it's a very fun job. It's a very fun job, very fun industry. It's the downside, of course, is that a lot of companies are very long hours, incredibly long hours, and a lot of it's not necessary. It's just poor planning.
Yeah, crunch is something that they keep trying to tackle every few years. The big crunch date comes up, and you might see a small solution for a year or two, and then it's right back the way it was.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see if they can finally get it to stick. The other big one recently was crediting people in video games and how video game credits are done. Several companies basically have said that if you aren't currently with the company when the game ships, they don't put you in the credits. Whether you worked on it or not, you don't end up in the credits.
Yeah, that's common. And I guess maybe it's a controversy now, but that's always been the case.
Yeah, I think it's because people, especially with some of the companies that have folded or laid off a ton, they couldn't use the game as technically a reference because they're not listed in the credits for the game, even though they worked on it until they were laid off. So
it also might be because like the Kickstarter thing, it's like you're letting somebody put $20 down to get their name on the video.
Yeah.
When somebody put 1,000 hours and doesn't, it seems like it starts making it seem more unfair than if you didn't have those people walking down just a few bucks for it.
Yeah, Kickstarter has been really interesting for the types of video games that are getting made the last really about 5 to 8 years since Kickstarter's been around. We're actually getting some really interesting game topics, game stories, and a few interesting game mechanics. I mean, FTL, which is one that thousands of one that was done through Kickstarter, and it would not have been made normally. I mean, if somebody approached the company and said, look, we want to make a roguelike game where every time you die, you have to start the game over, make the wrong choices and you can die very quickly, in a science fiction setting with just unusual mechanics between pausing, not pausing, and issuing commands, I can see most game companies going, next please, because it's just not a safe bet. So Kickstarter has allowed those kind of games and those kind of stories to really start to flourish, which is fantastic. Except when you have people that either run away with your money or the game that's released is nowhere near what was actually promised.
The game industry used to go through kind of phases where there would be a year or two where there's a lot of new interesting games, and then there'd be 4 or 5 years where people just made clones of those games. And now it seems like the big companies are basically just doing clones or series, and all the like creativity is in indie games, and sometimes the big companies will say, oh, that's a neat concept, we'll take that in this particular series or something.
Yeah, we've seen that Valve is famous for that. A company comes up with a fascinating concept, gets one game out, and Valve goes, okay, we want you to be able to make more of that, so here, we're gonna buy you, and now you're under our umbrella, go make some more games. But by doing so, that means they're tied under the Valve umbrella, and they lose a little bit of their independence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit of a trade-off.
I'm curious, from the time they start a game till they ship it, how long does it normally take, and how many people are involved in all that?
That varies wildly.
I know some are a lot bigger than others.
I've worked on games that were like, I guess 5 really kind of core developers. It took about a year and a half. I've worked on games that took, I worked at the game for like 7 years. I guess it was 4 years. Fallen Earth was 4 years before it was released, right? Yeah. That was probably 120 or so people. Yeah, so it varies a great deal depending on the kind of game you're making, the kind of quality you want. Art takes the most time usually.
So it's like Minecraft, to give you an example. When Minecraft was first started, it was a core team of about, it was, Marcus Peterson, Notch, at first, who then brought in people to get the game going and get it launched. And then, so it was a small team, I think it was like 10 to 15 people at Mojang, until Microsoft bought it. And then all of a sudden, the team went from 15 people to, 150 people. I mean, there's between, and honestly, a lot of that's marketing and communications. That was all. I actually have a friend of mine who is the head PR person for Minecraft at Microsoft, and it's just fascinating seeing how where a lot of the work has gone. They're still putting out new stuff, new innovative stuff for the game, but they really have a higher focus on marketing and getting deals out there to promote the game, get it in people's hands. But that's an example of one that went from indie to AAA in a very, very short period of time. So what was I'm curious, because you've been gaming for quite a while, what's the very first game you remember playing?
I think it was Space Combat. It was an early arcade game. And it was a science fiction game.
Which is perfect.
Yeah.
Considering we haven't even gotten to that part yet, but I figure this is just kind of a very relaxed panel discussing it. But, so Space Combat. I don't remember that one myself.
There were other arcade games out because Space Combat actually came out before I was born, but it was like there was an arcade machine at an airport when we were traveling somewhere. I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Cool.
I talked to my parents when we played. I didn't know what I was doing.
Was it like a Galaga type game?
It was a kind of upgrade of Space War, which is one of the contenders for the very first video game. It was made in 61 or 62, which is why there's a lot of contention over what the first actual video game was, because no one remembers exactly when they did any of them. And it's kind of like Asteroids, but with no asteroids and with an enemy ship. You have a very asteroids-looking kind of triangular vessel, and you shoot, the enemy ship, which is also kind of a different triangular vessel, and the computer controls one of them, and you try to fight each other.
Which, honestly, you get 2 people playing that kind of game can still entertain for hours, just for fun. It's funny because mechanics don't always dictate amount of fun, or sophistication of game doesn't always dictate amount of fun.
I recently, a year or so ago, I picked up a game on Steam that was based on somebody made it while they were bored from a game called Path of Exile, and this is Bike Path, and it's basically an Asteroids clone, but with with more enemy types and like a skill tree for your little ship, so that you like upgrade your ship.
That's cool. I'll have to check
Yeah,
that out.
yeah, that sounds interesting.
My first one, so I was born in '83, and my very first computer I got the Christmas of '88. My parents had no idea at the time that buying me a computer then was going to end up with me in the computer field for pretty much the rest of my life. But they got me a Tandy 1000 HX. Took out a loan for the Christmas that year. Had the max RAM on it, one floppy disk drive, 3.5 inch, and the Tandy graphics, and a printer, and a few games. So the very first game I loaded was the Sesame Street coloring book, because that was just the first disc I got out of the box and got into the PC. But from an actual gameplay perspective, the first one that I actually sat down and went for an extended period was Star Trek: The Rebel Universe, which was one of the semi-text adventures for Star Trek at the time. We had the Promethean Prophecy, the Rebel Universe, and there was the Kobayashi alternative, if I remember correctly. And so I had a label of the Rebel Universe. One of our used bookstores in town happened to have it for like $5. The owner was a good friend of the family, and he was downsizing some of his computer games, and that was one we picked up. I can't tell you how many times I played that, and still have it, actually. One of the things I collect, and so my focus is generally on science fiction and video games of all types, really from, my goal is 1983 on, but if I find something before that that's a computer game, I'm still going to grab it, but my focus is my birth year on. That one I still come back to every now and again just because it was the first game I just sunk my teeth into. So from a gaming perspective, were you primarily console focused in the beginning, or were you PC focused?
Well, we had an Apple II at school, and I really wanted a computer. And when TI went out of business, they were selling the TI 9994A for like $50 or something. It was really cheap at the time. So my parents got me one of those because they could actually afford that one. And then gradually over time, as people like sold those off or whatever, I collected more and more cartridges and stuff for it.
Oh,
So
awesome.
I learned programming with, well, I had an Altair kit a long time ago, so I guess I learned programming some of the Altair kit. But then all I could do with it is just like 8 LEDs and little dip switches to program it. I made it do the Knight Rider thing.
Oh, nice.
That was my big achievement on that computer.
You know, it's funny, they actually re-released a few years ago a clone that is FPGA on, chip on board, but they set it up, it's a duplicate of the Altair setup, and it works exactly the same. But one of the things they included in the case, because the boards look like they big now, you can actually mount an entire computer motherboard inside of it and actually build a computer inside of an Altair.
Yeah. Anyway, then I eventually got the extended basic kit cartridge for the TI, and that's what I mostly learned to program was with TI extended basic.
Oh, okay, awesome. So mostly, I guess, text adventures, things like that? Or?
Yeah. We used to have computer gaming magazines with Cindy. A magazine, you'd have code that you would actually type into the computer. But then if you do that like an adventure game, you've already read all the lines of text while you're typing them in, and you know what the game's going to do.
Exactly.
So I was trying to like do things like make it more random and things like that to make it more fun for me to actually play over and over.
Yeah, those, I've got quite a few of those magazines still, and there's actually a couple of books that Compute put out around that time period of basic games to put into your machine. And I loved the fact that they wanted people to learn how to code badly enough that they included it in a gaming format to get people interested in doing it. I thought that was a very sneaky, very good way of getting kids to learn to code.
Yeah, there's some games like that. Like, I remember Rocky's Boots, for instance. It was very much like these little sensors, and you have like AND gates and OR gates and flip-flops and stuff that you used to, like, you're trying to like get the boot to kick a green square, and then you have like a sensor for square and a sensor for green and an AND gate. And
Nice.
Yeah, so it teaches you basic like Boolean algebra.
I'm kind of curious, I spent more time on the fantasy gaming side, but what are some of your favorite all-time sci-fi games, and why were they better than the rest?
That's a good question. My favorite game of all time is probably still Daggerfall. It's not a fantasy game. Or not a science fiction game, rather. Probably my favorite science fiction game is the original Deus Ex.
Ooh,
And the
good
thing
choice.
I really liked about it, I like the story. I really like the level design. The level design is very, very clever. There's like 20 different ways to accomplish every objective. A lot of them unintended because they had a lot of emergent gameplay with the different mechanics. The only thing I really don't like about it is some of the voice acting.
Yeah, it was a little clunky for the time period, but from a do whatever you like perspective, yeah, the original Deus Ex, they accounted for nearly everything you could do. When he's talking about 20 options to solve a mission, that includes ways that you should not ever be able to complete it. But if you do it that way, then they have a story branch planned for that. And I can't imagine the amount of writing they had to do to plan for all of those scenarios.
Well, I think they were just clever about the way that they built the levels so that like if your objective is to get to this location, they don't care how you get there. They build like a little sewer you can break into and sneak through. Then they have like these gun turrets you can disable and run through this hallway, and these guards you can sneak through and like avoid their patrols. It's your choice how to do it. But then once you enter that area, there's just like an area trigger that says, oh, you've gotten here.
They had one instance where there were mines you could plant on the walls to blow up to catch enemies unaware, but they wouldn't blow up if you walked by them. What they didn't realize is that they stuck out far enough from the wall that the player model could jump on them and land on them. And so you actually could build a staircase up to a higher part of the level you weren't supposed to be able to get to until quite later. So you could bypass whole chunks of a level with a mechanic that they did not intend for you to use in that method.
I think part of the trick with like writing it so you can accomplish an objective multiple ways is to not trying to get cute and have like something happen midway between the start and the real objective.
Yeah.
If you can't have like a cutscene halfway there on one route.
Yeah, unless it's like something that's totally optional, like if it's kind of an Easter egg. If you happen to go that route, you see it, and if you go the other route, you don't.
You can't have something mission critical on one
Yeah,
possible
they
route.
don't have anything like that. The objectives are pretty simple in that game. It's just that the level design is very well done, so that there's a lot of different ways to get there.
For me, probably from a favorite game perspective, I've got two. That one is one that I keep going back to year after year. That's just my all time, and then my current favorite. And so right now, the one that I've been playing quite a bit, actually over 40 hours in on my Twitch with it, is called Generation Zero. It's a small company, I say small company. It is the first game this company has self-developed and self-published. They have done other games, but this is the first one that they've done just totally on their own. And it is a game set in the late 80s Cold War in Sweden with actual island that exists in Sweden. And so you come back from a trip with some friends. This is how they do the co-op multiplayer. You and several friends are coming back from a trip to one of the islands in a boat. Boat gets sunk by artillery, wash up on the shore, and there's no humans left. You can't find any living humans. But there are these mechs that are everywhere, and no clue how they got there. Because they weren't there when you guys left like 3 days prior. And so it's by Avalanche Studios, and this one, they did the Just Cause series and a couple of hunting games, and it is a really weird 80s sci-fi dystopic because you walk into a bunker and they've got computers that look like Commodore PETs sitting there on the table with the blue screens, 640K RAM or 64K RAM, waiting for you to type in stuff. You can't, but it's a nice effect. They have copied the 80s tech aesthetic pretty well. It's a first-person shooter with a lot of strategy and a really interesting story because it's all told through the environment. There's answering machine messages, not audio logs. People have phones with answering machines on them. You listen to the answering machine message. There's logs, there's recorded radio calls. It's really interesting because I still haven't figured out. I put 40 hours in, and I still have no clue where the mechs came from. Who's controlling them? I have an idea. But that's it. It's a fascinating kind of more heavy, hard science fiction, but obviously still science fiction. All time though is Starflight. This was a game that inspired, it was the grandfather of the open world sci-fi game. I mean, any open world sci-fi game since owes a very large debt to Starflight.
Like a Leap kind of game?
Well, so Starflight was, it was done by Interstellar and Binary Systems out. EA eventually published it, and it actually was re-released on the Genesis about 8 years after it came out because they all wanted to see it on a console. It was, you basically start off with a ship, you have one ship. You have a crew that you hire, it's all these different races. Depending on your crew makeup, when you encounter other aliens, they may be hostile or they may be friendly. And you're trying to figure out why the galaxy, basically, everybody was separated from everybody else. There was a cataclysmic event, and that's all we know. Star Control cites Starflight as a very, very heavy influence. Mass Effect, I mean, just traveling around all the star systems in Starflight, Mass Effect did that. Having a branching story that you could solve in a non-linear fashion, that was in Starflight. It's one that my goal is to collect all the different versions of it, and I've got, I think, just about all of them at this point. But it was the first real super heavy, non-Star Trek or Star Wars sci-fi game.
Now, how old is that one? When did it first come out?
That one, I think, came out in '86, if I remember correctly. I'd have to actually double check to be sure, but it was one of the early Electronic Arts ones because it was in the LP style box. So Electronic Arts for a while, they treated their games like rock stars. And they treated their developers like rock stars. So they released their games in almost a vinyl style box. Literally same size as a record. And they had pictures of the development team prominently on it. And they wanted to show off what people had made. Electronic Arts is a little bit different these days. But back then, that was their focus, was on treating games and gamers like rock stars. And it worked quite well. But I'm pretty sure that the first one was on, originally it was on 5 1/4 floppies. And I have the Apple and Commodore version. So it was, I'm pretty sure 86, it was either 85 or 86 that it was released. Starflight 2 came out, I think around 89 or 90. And then that was the last that they did with Starflight. Until they released the Genesis version, which I think was in 92? In 92 or 93. But those are my two big ones, for sure.
Yeah, I played Star Control and I really liked that. I never played Starflight though. I might have to go back and check it out.
Yeah, it's on GOG right now for maybe it's either $2.99 or $4.99. So it's super expensive. But that's something I love, is that a lot of these older games are getting a new life breathed into them by services like GOG.
I'm glad GOG's doing that.
Mhm.
I've picked up some old games that I remember enjoying, but then the newer machine might not play it. And having somebody do the emulator and all, that's great.
Yeah, and the fact that there's no DRM restrictions, there's no weird launchers you have to run. You buy the game, download the game, it's your game.
Yeah, I don't play a lot of modern games, and it's because I really only buy games on top.
Yeah.
Or from independent developers that sell it, like sometimes from Itch, but sometimes independent developers will sell directly. But I do not buy games on Steam or Epic Store.
Yeah, Epic, the only games I've gotten off the Epic Store are the free ones that they offer every month. Yeah, I was gonna say that. Well, that's the big debate that's kind of being stirred up again. It seems like about every 5 to 10 years, the debate over software as a service versus software as a item comes back up, and nobody has come up with a good solution or even good recommendations for it. The companies want it as a license that they can, pull back at any time, especially if they want you to buy the new version. People want to, when they buy something, to own it, which if you don't have a physical product is much more difficult to claim. And we still haven't even seen how enforceable EULAs are in the court. Can they do that? Don't know. They've been doing it for years, but nobody's had a major court case that's gone all the way up to prove it.
Yeah, no one wants to actually test that.
Yeah. Because it could, right now it's debatable, but if there's a court case like that, then there is actually legal precedent, however it's determined. But yeah, GOG has, and it's great because their sorting and searching algorithm, if I want a sci-fi game, pretty much if I type in science fiction or sci-fi in the search engine, I'm going to get a list of games that meet exactly that criteria, or at least close enough that you can call them sci-fi. And I'm probably only gonna pay between $2.99 to $9.99 depending on the age of the game and what it comes with, which is just awesome.
I had some friends tell me about that, and I picked up some stuff I played a long time ago, like Heroes of Light and Magic, or Civilization, or Baldur's Gate, some of those things. It was great.
Wing Commander, that was one of the first ones I purchased off GOG, was the original Wing Commander games.
What do you like better between that and maybe like Alpha Centauri, or?
So, I was about to say, that's two completely different genres there. For strategy, God, there's so many of them. Alpha Centauri was like the sci-fi strategy game for a while.
Galactic Civilizations.
When Galciv came out, Stardock did a fantastic job with the first two Galcivs. I haven't played the third one, so I don't know.
Yeah,
I haven't played the first one, I've played the second and third. I like most of the things they did in the third one. I like the hex grid better than the square grid for one thing. It looks a lot, it makes things look a lot cleaner. But it feels like it's a little harder to like kind of do your own thing, because like with the tech tree in E2, it was really easy to just design your own race from the ground up.
See, my problem with a lot of the strategy games, especially the ones that are very, very open world, very tell your own story, if they don't provide me ways of oohing and eyeing over an accomplishment that I've done, I tend to lose interest pretty quickly. I need to have something that says, okay, you've done this, so congratulations, you've unlocked this, or you have caused this event. And I enjoy emergent gameplay in a lot of games, but if you don't provide me something that says...
It's definitely a problem with Elite Dangerous, is that it's a sandbox with nothing in it.
And my problem with sandbox games is if I don't have an objective of some kind, if I don't have a
goal or cards.
Yeah, I get bored. Because once I've explored the game mechanics that I can easily find, I just get bored. But when you have a game like Elix, which is a sci-fi RPG that was put out, and actually it looks like Elix 2 has been announced recently. That one, you can play your character however you want, and there is so much to do, but there's still an overarching goal the entire time. You're not just doing side quests for side quest's sake. Every side quest you do has an impact at some point on the story.
In your opinion, what's the most important thing about a game? Is it the music, the graphics, the story? What about a game will either make it or break it for you?
That really depends on the type of game I'm playing. If it is an RPG, then story and how they handle my character. If it's a strategy game, it's how well do they calculate what I'm doing in terms of damage or tactics. Does what I do make sense? For adventure games, do the puzzles make sense? Moon Logic is not sci-fi. Moon Logic is just crazy. Think Sierra games. So it really depends on the genre that I'm playing as to what's the most important. If it has crappy music across any game, if I can turn it off, great. If I can't, then yeah, that's going to limit how long I play. Is the voice acting terrible? Well, if I got subtitles and I can turn off voice audio, yeah, I live with that. And some of them are your typical B movie, so bad it's good. I mean, that is how some of the games work. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it's mainly the mechanics. It depends. It does depend some on the genre. Because, like you said, like for a point-and-click adventure game, I really want good puzzles. I want good story. But for most genres of games, I really like mechanics, and I prefer games that have interesting mechanics to ones that have perfect mechanics.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. If I can screw up in a way that's really cool, that's awesome. To give you an example, like the game I've been playing, Generation Zero, one of the things you can do is your character has fireworks and flares. And so the flares attract the mechs towards them. They will shoot it wherever the flare is. And then the fireworks confuse their targeting systems. So if you've got 2 or 3 of the mechs together and you throw fireworks in the middle, there's a good chance they're going to shoot each other and do some damage before you even get in there. Well, I had a huge mech that was probably the size of this room. It was called a harvester mech, outside of a barn that had 2 doors. And so I had about 10 fireworks in my inventory, but I could only hold 5 at a time. So here I am, I'm throwing fireworks, ducking into the barn while the fireworks were going off, and shooting the mech from the rear. It had no way to know where I was because the targeting sensors were confused. And I was able to run back and forth enough to keep him in that spot because he couldn't attack me when I was firing at him from that side door. So using mechanics, I don't quite think they intended to work that way. I took out a mech way sooner than I probably should have been able to with weapons that should not have been able to destroy it at that point.
You guys ever play one called Redneck Rampage?
Oh, God. Yes, Interplay games back in the day.
That was so funny just because I loved it. You get health points back drinking beer and eating the pork rinds, but if you drink too much beer, it affects your aim because you're getting drunk. I was sold on it the first time a friend showed me.
So a good example of a game like that where there's humor that worked then versus humor that works now, Shadow Warrior. So the very first Shadow Warrior with Lo Wang. Oh, you want some Wang? Literally is one of the lines in the game. And it is a very irreverent B-movie kind of kung fu style shooter it was around the same period as Duke Nukem 3D, Redneck Rampage, and several of the others. So the humor and jokes then, which were quite a bit on the crude side, given some of the way humor has been going as of late in gaming, when they decided to reboot the series, Lo Wang is still the main character in Shadow Warrior, and he is still just as funny as he was back then, but with an entirely different type of humor. Back then it was literally, we were gonna mock the Asian stereotype, the Asian movie stereotype,
And the dick joke names.
and the dick joke names. The dick joke names still exist in the new one, because dick jokes are universal, I think, through every era. But the more racially insensitive jokes have been swapped. Like I said, he's still just as funny as he was then, but with an entirely different kind of humor, and that's a way of seeing how gaming has managed to evolve in some aspects. With science fiction games, for a while, you had the same games being stamped over and over. You had your strategy games, you had your adventure games, you had your, well, really those were the 2 main sci-fi genres. You had adventure games and strategy games. And they kept just getting, cookie cutter over and over. And then finally, I'd say, what about the late 90s to early 2000s, we finally saw sci-fi break out of those kind of 2 stereotypes. Oh, and fight sims, with Wing Commander and such.
Like, are you talking about like expanding the genres that were there?
Yeah, kind of figuring out how to integrate sci-fi into genres where it hadn't really been integrated before.
Like an MMO, like with Anarchy Online. You ever played that?
Yeah, MMO is a good category that they added, that kind of sci-fi was able to break into. Even RPGs, I think, with Deus Ex, games like that, we finally started seeing, KOTOR, we started seeing different genres for sci-fi outside of the strategy, adventure, fight sim.
I think most of the genres of sci-fi, either whether you look at it from like the literary genres or from like different types of games, I think they're pretty early. I can think of a couple exceptions that just aren't very common, like time travel. You have like Chrono Trigger or Journeyman Project, but there's some that have time travel as a framing device, but there aren't very many that are actually about time travel.
Oh, I've
Same
seen
with like,
that's a really good
same
problem.
with like a space western. You could argue that like Borderlands is kind of a space western, but you don't see that as often in gaming. The Star Trek licensed games, which are kind of a space western.
Yeah, oh, well, I was gonna say, it depends on
I think it's
what
hard to
one.
use time travel as a.
It is. It's very difficult to use in a
As
game.
a mechanic rather than like
But for the most part, like I think, like as soon as 4X games became really popular, there were science fiction 4X games. When MMOs started coming out, there were science fiction MMOs. I kind of think it's science fiction as a theme for a game has been there with almost all types of games pretty early.
I think so you see, like you're saying that like, that it's not that there weren't other genres of sci-fi, that there weren't really other genres. And it like MMOs didn't exist, and then once MMOs did exist, sci-fi ones came along pretty
Or
quickly.
well-known sci-fi games started coming out.
Yeah.
Sci-fi may have been around for a while, but for instance with MMOs, the big MMOs for ages were Warcraft, Star Wars Galaxies, which is science fantasy. I'm sorry, I will argue with people, Star Trek is science fiction, except for the new reboots. You know, Star Trek is science fiction, Star Wars is science fantasy. I will argue that to my dying
I would say that like, if you're, I agree, but Star Wars still like kind of fills the sci-fi niche if you're looking for a game. It's like a sci-fi MMO is gonna have to compete with a Star Wars MMO,
But
more
like-
so than a fantasy game.
So with MMOs, for instance, how many people here remember Earth and Beyond? Okay, so I knew you played it as well.
I haven't played it, but I did know about it.
So EVE Online. If I say EVE Online, everybody knows from a sci-fi perspective, MMOs, EVE Online. You know, that is the big, well-known sci-fi MMO. But there were several before it that existed that almost nobody remembers. Earth and Beyond. Anarchy Online was a weird one. That was
It's
like,
still around.
yeah, I knew Funcom still has classic servers running for that. That was my first
I recently
ever.
heard about that, and I was like, oh, that's slightly interesting. How people are actually paying a subscription.
The problem, or what I see is them not being really representative of sci-fi, with Earth and Beyond being separate from that, is a lot of them just tend to throw sci-fi on as a skin
Yeah.
and not as the actual universe. Yes, it's sci-fi. I have psi abilities, which are just magic spells with the word psi in front of them.
Anarchy Online, the only real difference between it and a fantasy game is that there are a lot more range weapons because they're all guns.
So have you played a lot of MMOs?
Yeah.
What's your favorite sci-fi MMO?
Probably Anarchy Online. Played that for quite a while. It's a game I like games that are very interesting but flawed, more than games that are perfect. Because Anarchy Online is certainly not a perfect game, but it was a very interesting game. It had a lot of interesting mechanics to it.
The IP system, the way that the costs scale, but your per level only goes up at certain intervals, and you get IP locked for like 10 levels at a time, drives me up the wall.
Yeah.
For me, it was EVE Online from the MMO space. Although, anybody here remember Tabula Rasa?
Yeah.
I got a shirt from Goodwill, even though I never played the game.
I've got to send it to Richard. Lord British has actually agreed to sign a couple of my items, and I've got older game items, including Tabula Rasa. I played it in college. I loved it. The Logos language system that he came up with was
I was
fascinating.
interested in it because I was playing Guild Wars big at the time, and I can't remember the overlap. There's some kind of developer overlap.
See, for me,
I didn't play it because I was a high schooler and didn't have the money to pay for subscriptions for anything.
no, I understand that. For me, EVE Online is my big end-all, be-all MMO for sci-fi. And not in that it's the best at anything. It's simply the one I have sunk the most years into. Not just hours, but I actually, for a while, I was an in-game volunteer. I went to Iceland for FanFest. I didn't work to this panel, but I do actually have a dev shirt because of the volunteering that I did. They actually gave me an EVE Online dev shirt with the White Wolf logo on it. Mine, I got the shirt right after they had done the White Wolf buyout back in '06. But that one's one, very, very flawed, lots of issues with it. But oh my God, the stories you could tell in that game were what sold it for me. Not really the mechanics. The mechanics for the most part were good, and there were so many different mechanics of what you could do if you wanted to.
Yeah,
But the other people I interacted with were what made that game.
It was one of those games where you can read like stories people tell about like the crazy shit they pulled, and like people who've never played the game are like, damn, that's cool, even if they never want to play the game.
Yeah, it's
Like
everybody's
ice
heard of
and
the.
shit.
Yeah, everybody has heard of the. I mean, when the New York Times and Time Magazine are doing front page articles on, you know, millions of dollars in assets being destroyed in a video game, then you know a video game has kind of made it into mainstream consciousness. So, all right, so we've covered our favorite MMOs. Sci-fi adventure games for you? When I say adventure, both point and click and non-point and click, just the standard adventure genre.
I'm trying to think, which was the point and click adventures I played were fantasy. I mean, I guess you could argue the longest journey is sort of sci-fi. The Dig was a sci-fi game. The writing was really good. The puzzles were a little iffy at the start, especially.
The
I
Dig was
remember that was one of those games where I actually had to look up something to get past a point.
You know that what was so funny about that one? Alan Dean Foster did the novelization of it. I never beat the game because some of the puzzles just pissed me off to no end.
Yeah, I think Orson Scott Card did the writing for it, actually.
I think yeah, which was why it was odd that Alan Dean Foster did the novelization.
Yeah.
But I ended up reading the novel because I just got so pissed off at the game. Stopped playing it. What about Space Quest? Did you ever play any Space Quest games?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about those. Yeah, I played those a long, long time ago. Yeah, those are funny.
Callahan's Cross Time Saloon.
I haven't played that.
That one's, I think, available in GOG. That was one that it's sci-fi because Spider Robinson is a sci-fi author. His books are sci-fi, but they are not. I don't know a good way to describe Spider's books.
I've read some of them. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
They're kind of, it's more like the sci-fi equivalent of urban fantasy.
Okay, I can see that. I like that.
Some of the early text adventure games.
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
of those were sci-fi. The best ones, like my favorites, are like The Hitchhiker's Guide, Trinity, A Mind Forever Voyaging. Those are all sci-fi
yeah.
games.
It's funny that you mentioned the Mind Forever Voyaging. I had gone through on a couple of the Facebook groups I'm either admin for or a member of and asked for recommendations of games to talk about. And that was like 3 different groups, somebody mentioned the Mind Forever Voyaging. Which if you've never played it, I'm not going to spoil the story, but if you've never played it and you want to explore what it means to be human versus a machine, play it. The writing is incredible, and the ideas it presents are fantastic. The Hitchhiker's Guide, that is an iconic text adventure, but the Babelfish puzzle so pisses people off.
Yes, and also there's stuff you have to do really early that you don't find out until very late.
Yeah, those you can put yourself in an unwinnable state very, very easily.
Yeah, very, very early, and then it doesn't tell you you're in an unwinnable state for 20, 30 hours of gameplay.
Maniac Mansion
Yeah.
and Day of the Tentacle, those would be, I think, weird sci-fi.
Yeah, I would say they're a sci-fi.
And that one actually is one where time travel is used as a mechanic very, very well.
I think I'll ever play Warframe.
Recently, I've had it downloaded and watched a couple of Twitch streamers like Co Carnage play it. I haven't had a chance to get into it yet.
I guess The Last Express might count as a time travel game because of the way the save system works.
Oh yeah, and you can rewind and
Yeah.
fast forward. And that one actually, from a story perspective, that's a case that I would have loved to have seen a movie or mini-series on HBO of that.
There's actually an anime Terminator, and it's based off of a visual novel and time travel. That's the central mechanic to it, like saving and going back and resetting to.
Well, and we can't really, so moving on to simulation games. I don't think anybody can talk about science fiction without talking about MechWarrior Battletech from a simulation standpoint.
X-Wing Fighter. I mean, the original LucasArts X-Wing was just,
That's very true.
it was brilliant. I spent way too much time playing that, and then TIE Fighter, and then it kind of went iffy, but I mean, it used the CH Pro stick, so it just had everything you wanted, and the graphics pushed the technology of the time. But
All right, speaking of technology and simulation, how many people here heard of Steel Battalion?
Heard of what?
I think I recognize the name.
I've heard of it, but never played it.
Okay, so I kid you not, I had a friend of mine down in North Carolina who had the entire original Xbox, control stick, the pedals in both games, sitting in his garage just collecting dust. So I talked with him and I traded him a bunch of my Warhammer 40K, speaking of science fantasy, my Warhammer 40K stuff to him, and I got the entire control package for Steel Battalion. So this one was on original Xbox. The control stick is my cane. The control stick, yeah, this is about right.
Wow.
That's the width of the control stick with more switches and knobs on it than you can imagine. Foot pedals to control acceleration and turning. And interesting concept. Right before your mech is about to explode, it will flash on the screen to eject. You can choose to eject or not. Maybe you think you pull the battle out. If you don't eject and the mech is destroyed, you're killed in action and your save file is nuked. So it was probably the most intense sci-fi simulation on a console that I've ever played. I mean, it was like literally to the complexity of BattleTech and MechWarrior, especially MechWarrior 2, but on a console. It was fascinating because there's been nothing else like it. So, from a simulation standpoint, though, what are some of your favorites?
Like
Oh, we got 5 minutes. Thanks.
like a space flight simulator.
Well, simulation in general, because they do cover both spaceflight, ground-based.
It's not sci-fi, but the original F-16 simulator, I mean, that became a thing. They were companies setting up multiple simulation pods in there. You would rent time on it and get it, F-16 Fighting Falcon.
Yeah, I'll mention one that the kind of game that I wish there was more of, or at least more that was high quality, was like the original Elite or the original like Wing Commander Privateer, where you do play as a space flight simulator, but it's also kind of a trading game and you can take multiple roles.
That's what Elite Dangerous is.
Yeah, but I've been disappointed in most of the newer ones. There's been
Yeah.
quite a few of them that have come out, but they haven't really quite done that.
Speaking
Speaking
of Kickstarter.
You always wanted the epic space battle and then the ability to land somewhere and then have that adventure and then go back up to the epic space battle. And when that game had that bridge, it always fell short on each, just enough that you were like,
So CCP and EVE Online had an interesting idea for that. Because what they wanted to do was cater to 2 different types of gamer. They wanted to cater to your MMO, space-based, MP players. They also wanted to cater to shooter fans because they didn't really have anything. So what they did, and it didn't last very long, but they are rebooting it, and I think it's actually supposed to be making a comeback. Dust 514. So basically the way it worked, or the way it was supposed to work, in EVE Online, if you wanted to take over a planet, you would hire mercenary groups to go in and do the land-based portion of it, fight against whoever's controlling the planet. That's where Dust 514 came in. That was a first or third person shooter, depending on how you wanted to configure the view. And it used some of the same implant and training systems that EVE did, but you actually were on the planet taking out enemies to take over the planet.
I've always wanted to see something like that on a larger scale, like a strategy game that had like a good balance of space stuff and like the ground stuff. Like
I'm going to throw one your way that's going to sound odd because I don't know how many people remember it. Battlecruiser 3000 AD. Derek Smart put out a game that was, honestly, it got lambasted badly by the gaming press. And the reason it did, I didn't know this till much later, because I've actually chatted with Derek on Twitter. So at one point, basically, the game was supposed to be published by Take-Two, I think. And they put the game out before he was ready for it to be put out. It was the usual case of, it's Christmas, we gotta ship it. And damn the patches, we'll fix it later. Well, the problem is a game like that, it's very, very difficult to fix later, especially in an era of still mostly dial-up for people. I mean, sure, there were PC Gamer discs that had patches on them, but you couldn't, once a game was released then, unless they released an expansion or had a way for you to order a disc with the fix, I mean, that was how the game was forever and ever, amen. And so he ended up actually, after the game came out, he purchased every retail box he could get. He bought out his contract with Take-Two and tried to basically, it has actually been fixed since. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but he has released patches over the years since to actually make it work, but it was designed from large scope all the way down to ground base. list.
Yeah, it's like, that was one of my things I didn't enjoy too much about Galactic Civilization, is like you invade a planet, and it's just like, it just smashed the two armies together. I think I want to see a game that's like Galactic Civilization or Sins of the Solar Empire, where you, instead of taking over a planet being some like minor mechanic of the space part, it's like its own mini game that's equally in depth to the space battles.
Space Rangers, which is a kind of a smaller known game, it was done by a Russian company. That one was one where you had to travel through space, you had space battles, in an overhead perspective, very much not like it wasn't a simulation. It was
Yeah.
more of a, just this, click and shoot kind of. Oh, well, looks like we're pretty much done, I think. So,
Where can we find you guys online?
Nowhere.
Nowhere?
you can find me if you go on Twitter, it's LongwoodGeek, Twitch, LongwoodGeek, and I've got links in there to my YouTube and some of my other sites. But thank you very much, sir. I enjoyed this. We need to do this again. Yeah, this was fun. I enjoyed this. I wish we had like 2 hours.
I think every panel needs to be like 2 hours long, and just but still only take an hour.
Yeah, I made little note cards about both my panels, and only one thing came up on the principles of game design. Nothing else I was prepared to talk about.
I remember
But that's
those
kind
days
of the way
when
it is.
Derek Smart
Yeah.
was best known for the Flame Wars that he would get in with everyone.
Oh, you ought to see his